Hey, it's Jordan with the Young Turks and TYT Politics, and I am taking a break from WikiLeaks and all that business to talk to someone I've wanted to talk to for a while. Her name is Sabrina Schrader. She's running for the West Virginia House of Delegates. And Sabrina, you and I have been talking for a little bit. You have a very, I think, inspiring, interesting story. You're running now, but for a long time, you were not really in the political arena, just because you cared, you were spotlighting the injustices around you, particularly poverty. But your own story, you've had to overcome a lot. Talk to me about growing up in West Virginia, and I know about in high school you had a situation that most people don't have to deal with.
Well, I was born in a generational poverty where no one in my family was fortunate enough to graduate from high school. So no one had gotten a bachelor's degree from college. And I got in a car wreck. When I was 16, I was a passenger. Three vehicles hit us, one from the front, back, and the side. There was black ice on the road. My head hit the dashboard, cracked the windshield, knocked my window out. I broke 5 ribs, collarbone, clavicle, scapula, vertebrae in my neck, and my lungs collapsed. I died 3 times on the way to the hospital, was in a coma for a week, unconscious for 2 weeks. When I woke up, they told me I was mentally challenged and paralyzed, and I would be that way for the rest of my life. I didn't believe it. So, like a week or two, I started walking again. A week or two later, and maybe about 3 weeks later, I told them I was ready to go back to school. And I remember the psychiatrist told me, I talked about going to college while I was in the hospital. The psychiatrist told me that I had traumatic brain injury and that I wouldn't have a good memory anymore and I couldn't learn, and to give up on that dream. She wanted to prepare me for my future. I did end up graduating, thank God, and I went to college. And when I got to college, I actually got meningitis, a brain infection that almost killed me. And then I got mono, my spleen almost ruptured. So I've had to go through a lot of obstacles just in that arena with health, just to get a college degree. And I got one in 2008, a bachelor's of social work degree.
Going through all this, I mean, these were your, formative years. You were 16. I'm assuming all of this lingered into college. You said you got meningitis while in college. What about you didn't listen to the doctors? What did you see that they weren't seeing? Because most people, any one of those things could have kind of like mentally defeated them, but it seems you kind of just said, screw it, they're wrong.
Well, I was going to keep trying, if anything. I've seen a lot of people go through a lot of hardships throughout my whole life. People who are born in generational poverty go through things like that. My dad had a brain tumor in his early 20s, the size of his fist, in the middle of his brain, and he had a 50-50 chance of living when they removed it, and he lived. I've seen people go through these types of things, and I know I'm very fortunate because some people die, and my stepsister, she went through a similar situation, and she learned to walk and talk again and then had a stroke and had to do it again, and eventually she did die a few years ago from pneumonia. I mean, so it's just like living this hard is not fair. Right. Anyway. If we would have had access to better health care and service providers that could help us, then life would be much more manageable, and a lot of these issues actually are preventable.
Well, that was my next question. I'm assuming, being from West Virginia, you said you were kind of born into generational poverty. I assume you didn't have great health care to deal with this.
No. Actually, it sounds like, oh, she graduated from high school and then she went from the car wreck to the brain infection to mono. Well, there's even more than that. About 4 years ago, I worked in a building that had mold in it, and I was sick with lung infections, bronchitis, sinus infections. I ended up on all these inhalers and steroids and antibiotics, no health insurance, so I was having to go to the emergency room and clinics, and I ended up getting overdosed on steroids, and it about killed me a few years ago, and I didn't have health insurance for that. I didn't get workers' compensation. So I have thousands in medical bills. All this horrible stuff has happened to me. And the way the systems are set up is to just blame you. I mean, it's supposed to be all my fault. But that is really stressful. I figured out I have to go around these systems. So I've been working on writing books, and I hope to publish one before this year is up, about what I've learned the past several years about politics as being a person who was conditioned to not get involved with politics and not talk about it. So it was just like a world I never even knew existed until 2013, and I went upon many levels and even have journalists from other countries coming and talking to me now.
Well, that's what I wanted to know. My assumption is all this adversity you faced and overcoming it gave you a particular lens to see other people's struggles through. How'd you kind of slowly get involved with politics? Because I know it wasn't immediately running for office.
It wasn't. A few years ago, I was taking an Appalachian culture class. I was trying to get a master's degree in social work, but since I almost died, I couldn't finish any of that. And
you must hold the world record for almost dying.
Bernie Sanders says poverty is a death sentence. Mm-hmm. And I've been given it quite a few times. I actually was born 3 months early.
Oh, wow.
And the doctors told my mom I wouldn't live, and she risked her life to have me, and she lived. So, yeah, I mean, there's many purposes for my life. When I was taking the Appalachian culture class, I had read about poverty when I got to college, and I thought that was other countries. And a few years ago, I realized I was an Appalachian, with West Virginia being the only state completely encompassed by the Appalachian Mountains. It makes us different. Our culture is different. However, for most of my life, I had been taught to not be myself and, to just act how other people wanted me to act. And, it really stung and hurt to figure out I was the one living in poverty, because I'd worked hard my whole life. And once I realized that, I started to look to see if there was anybody talking about poverty, and there wasn't that I could find. So I started speaking at conferences, not scheduled, just saying I'm the only person in my family that was able to graduate from high school. Because people say, oh, I'm the first one to go to college, and I started thinking, well, because of all the problems, nobody but me was able to graduate from high school, and I had to face death to do it. And then got the bachelor's degree, and how hard that was, because it seems like all these systems have constantly set us up to fail over and over and over again. But the people that I know that's grown up the way I have, most of us never give up. We just keep trying. But if you don't know the rules and the players of the system, then it's not going to matter.
And I'm assuming you were racking up student loan debt while you were doing this.
Yeah, I have about $40,000, and that was at a little small college here. And I have worked several different jobs, and I have reported Medicaid fraud, by the higher-ups, or insurance fraud, or people taking children out of homes that they shouldn't, and I end up getting fired. But I'm a whistleblower. They say whistleblowers are protected, but not when you're working with a corrupt system, and corrupt and greedy people are in power. So that's led me on this path. This is the will for my life. I knew when I was little I was supposed to be part of a political revolution. Now, I didn't know what that meant. I knew a little bit about Martin Luther King, and I thought that we stood for the same issues and values. However, I realized I've got so much more insights about things than Martin Luther King. He had PhDs, and at least he had some people to value him and respect him, and I still don't get a lot of respect. It's not like it matters so much, but it does matter if people treat you decent. Mm-hmm. So I have to deal with a lot of bullying, and I've had to deal with that throughout my life. But I started speaking, and I thought I don't see anybody like me talking about poverty, and people didn't want me to talk about it, but I did. So after a multitude of going to meetings, and I didn't have a car. I mean, I can't even remember how I even got to these places. I mean, I had to negotiate a lot. The job that I had to do everything that my boss said, or I'd lose my job at any second. I would clean her cars and everything for free and deal with her personal family issues. And I mean, it's just like I had no protections, as like being an indentured servant. Mm-hmm. Before you were born, and then after you die, you still owe all these debts. This woman, Stephanie Tyree, works with the West Virginia Hub. She had heard me speak at several things, and I ended up being at this policy workshop. It was free, and she was there, and I remember grabbing pieces of paper off tables. I mean, I would take all the information that I could, and I wanted to share it with the people in my classes. And it said something about nominate someone to speak at the West Virginia legislature. To be honest, I really didn't know what that meant. And so I asked her, was that at the Capitol? Is that what it meant? And she said yes, and then she asked me if I wanted to do it. And I said, well, what would I be doing? And she said, talking about poverty. And I was like, oh, I'll do that. I mean, I've done all this research and statistics and everything. I'll do that. Well, a couple months later, I got a call saying that I was chosen and that they wanted me to tell my personal stories. Well, I didn't want to do that. You know, I didn't want to humiliate my family and or McDowell County. And that's really what started with McDowell County. We had lived in Mercer County till I was 13. McDowell County till I was 13, and then we moved to Mercer. Well, when I started out, hi, my name is Sabrina Schrader. I'm from Mercer County. I was like, well, actually, I'm not from Mercer County, but I lived in Athens. So I was like, I'm from Athens. And I was like, that's really not true either. And so I was like, I'm from Twin Branch Holler, in McDowell County. And I owned it. I mean, from the time I was 13 to the time I was 29, I felt like I wasn't allowed to say that. Mm-hmm. And so...
And for people who aren't from that area, explain to me the different areas and why it would be bad to say that.
Well, everybody knew McDowell had it the worst, okay? But they weren't compassionate about people from McDowell. Mm-hmm. It was more like, I'm better than you. In Mercer County, there's a couple hospitals, well, a few hospitals. There's 2 main colleges. There were several community colleges, but they closed down. More businesses here. The interstate road is here, and it doesn't run to McDowell County. So McDowell County's just been left out, and people just look down upon them. I mean, even in my college classes, we weren't allowed to talk about it. So I started doing that, and when I made my speech up for that, I mean, I practiced it for 2 weeks in the mirror. I didn't want to intentionally make us look bad, and I thought, well, what do I wish somebody would have said to me? Because up until that point, I didn't even know there was anybody around here that was the first person in their family to get a bachelor's degree. Mm-hmm. Because people didn't say this. And so I went through all this time like I felt like in a dark tunnel with no light, just going and going and going. And the holler I grew up in, you drive through a mountain and there is a tunnel. So it's like being in Twin Branch Tunnel with no openings and just, which way do I go? Which way do I go? And I just kept going my whole life until a few years ago it was like politics. So I spoke at the West Virginia legislature. And that made a lot of progress in a short period of time. About 100 people gave me their business cards that day in West Virginia, and people talked to me, and it seemed like in that aspect things were easier. Not even 2 months later, I got emails and phone calls from Bernie Sanders' office at the U.S. Senate. I had to do conference calls and speak with other Congress people, and they'd all ask me questions, and I'd just tell them the truth. And everyone would be silent. So I would think, well, I'm not going to get chosen for this because I wasn't sugarcoating it. I mean, I was just telling the truth. And so I got to speak there. Well, in our local news, none of this has been covered. You know, I mean, not on TV. The Charleston Gazette, and this is how they found out about me. The Charleston Gazette had done an article with my hand up in the air. I said, by the grace of God, I'm a walking, talking, and breathing miracle. Well, they snapped a picture of it with all the people in the room. And I mean, there's so many people there. They're out in the hallway. They're downstairs. I mean, hundreds of people. And they even come upstairs, you know, to tell me they were crying when they were listening to this. And at the time, I'm just overwhelmed. Like, you know, I feel like I'm going to fall apart. You know, I'm shaking. You know, it was the hardest thing at that point I had ever done. Poverty Gets a Face was the title of the article. And, you know, I thought, well, you know, I done struggled with myself for months during the summer with that class. And I was like, I'll take it. I mean, somebody's got to be the face. And we see people in other countries, but we don't see people like us.